This is Cars and Bids, and 2021 has come to an end. So today I'm going to talk about the trends that I see happening in 2022. I spend a lot of time looking at cars and their values and what's hot and what people want to see and watch on YouTube. And so I feel like I'm relatively dialed into some of the trends that are happening and some of the things that people are getting excited about. So today I'm going to tell you my thoughts on the trends in the car world and the car market next year or this year, depending on when this video goes live. Let's do it. Okay, trends in 2022. I don't pretend to be someone who knows the future, but I have a decent idea. I spend a lot of time in the car world. It's all I do. And so here are some of my thoughts on what's coming next year or in 22. Number one trend that I see next year, I think a lot of people are not going to be pleased about this, but the number one trend I see is that I don't think car prices are going to slow down being so high and so fast and so crazy anytime soon. A lot of people think that we're in a bubble, and that could be the case. But I think there are some crucial things to keep in mind before you say, oh, I'll just wait to buy a car until things go back to normal. Oh, I'll wait until the bubble bursts to buy a car. I think there's some important things to think about. Number one, inflation has occurred over the last year, since COVID, 18 months plus. And I think that some of these prices are just generally increased as a result. Inflation drives up prices. That's what it does. And it's happened, and it has brought prices to, I think, a higher level than they were at before. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of these things are just the new normal because we're in inflationary times. But that doesn't account for all of the change that we've seen in the car world. Another thing to keep in mind is the computer chip shortage, which has affected new car production for a long time, for maybe the last year or more. And as a result, new car dealers don't have as many cars to sell, which has put upward pressure on used car prices. The chip shortage will get solved, but I don't personally think it's going to get solved anytime soon. It might be that it gets solved in the next 6 months, 3 months, 6 months, not that far away. It could take longer, a year or more. But regardless, even if it's solved instantly, you have an enormous supply chain that needs to ramp back up. I go to dealerships that have 1,000 cars on their lot normally, and they tell me they have none or 50. And even if the computer chip shortage were solved tomorrow, it would take so much time to replenish that stock that I think you're going to find yourself in a situation where used car prices are artificially high, even above inflation, for a while, maybe even the next year or more. And there's a third reason why I think that car prices are going to stay relatively inflated this year, and that is the pandemic is still going strong. We have a new variant of COVID that is sweeping the world right now, and I wouldn't be surprised if that sort of thing continues. That's going to keep businesses anxious about going back into offices, and it seems like it gives people some extra time and some extra things they want to choose to do with their money instead of maybe eating out or traveling as much as they have, and so people seem to be interested in cars as one of the things to buy. It's a solo activity you can do. It's a fun thing to have. You're sitting at home not doing as much. Maybe you go out and buy an interesting car, and that seems to have driven some of the car market over the last year, and it looks like it's going to continue. So I think that's a big prediction next year. I don't think car prices are going to abate as much as some people hope and think they will. And on that topic, number two, another prediction I have for next year's car market, I think that pandemic cars, as I'm calling them, will stay hot. Specifically SUVs and trucks and vans, frankly, that let people go into the wilderness and explore. I think many people are still wary of traveling, especially with kids, but just in general, of getting into a plane, of staying in a hotel, of going to a big city, crowded spaces, that kind of thing. And so they are seeking out vehicles that allow them to pursue adventures without this pandemic-related worry, because they're more self-contained than flying. You can kind of get in your car with your whole family, go somewhere, do something, that sort of thing. And I suspect those cars will continue to be hot this year, especially as the pandemic continues on. This goes double for Toyota trucks. Land Cruisers, that's not on the market anymore. It's gone. Horrible timing by Toyota as ever. Demand is incredibly strong. Land Cruisers 4Runners, Tacomas, Tundras, those are the hottest adventure vehicles right now, and I suspect they'll continue to be hot, and that market will continue not to abate as the pandemic swings on. Next up, number three trend that I see happening next year that I've wanted to discuss for a while Certain new models will finally start to fall off this high precipice they're on in terms of value. Specifically, C8 Corvette and new Ford Bronco. For a long time, the C8 Corvette, you could buy one, and if you got it at sticker, you could flip it for way over sticker. You could drive it for 6 months and still make a ton of money on it. Broncos as well, that is coming to an end. Even in this supply-constrained world with the computer chip shortage, production is catching up slowly, but surely catching up with demand, and these cars will fall, and many of them already are. C8 Corvettes are no longer in short supply. They are still trading over sticker, partially because I think that's what the market has priced them at just generally, and Chevy was probably a little low, but either way, they're available. It's not like you have to know a guy who can find a guy who maybe knows of a C8 for sale. Those days are gone. They're easily available, and that demand is going to cool off. And it's the same deal with all cars like that. Ram TRX, the new M3, the Jeep Wrangler 392, all those cars are going to start to slow down in 22. More crazy new ones will come and probably follow them, but they're dropping off finally. Okay, next up, here is an interesting prediction I have in 2022. Lamborghini seems to be having a moment right now. I'm not exactly sure why, but Lamborghini, more than other brands, more than other exotic brands, is having a moment right now. Murcielagos are killing it on the used market. Countaches are killing it. Diablos are killing it. Everything. LMO02, all these Lamborghinis are going up. I'm not sure why Lamborghini specifically is doing so well. I don't quite understand it. Ferrari's there too, and it's doing well, but not like Lamborghini. Some of these Lambos have doubled or tripled in value in the last year, and I think that is totally crazy. But I also think it's no surprise. If you were to look back a year or 2 or 3 ago, you could see Countaches for sale for $250. You could see LMO02s for $150. Diablos in the 90s. That was never going to last. These are iconic cars, and I think that some of these younger people are aging into the money to buy some of these iconic cars, and that's what they want to do. I suspect this is a lot like the crazy muscle car run up in values 15, 20 years ago, but now it's happening to a different generation who idolized a different type of car. Do I think it's going to burst like the muscle cars? Maybe. You see some of these values of some of these cars that are worth 3x more because of their transmission. We saw it with Ferrari. That ain't going to last. But it's happening. It's clearly happening. And one car to watch out for, I think, is the Gallardo. Lamborghini Gallardos are still, in my opinion, way undervalued. Automatic ones can be had under $100,000. Stick ones just a little over. They deserve more. I think that car is aging well. It has a classic Lamborghini look. It is more serviceable than a lot of other Lambos. And I'm not saying more reliable, but more serviceable. Audi parts, dealers know how to work on them, and I suspect that Gallardo is also going to have its moment, especially stick ones. Okay, next up, here's another interesting prediction for next year. I think that cars from the 2000s and specifically the 2010s will continue to have their moment. We have run analysis, and our data has shown that a good 30% of the cars on Cars and Bids come from the 2010s, and another 40% come from the 2000s. This era is starting to be especially desirable. Enthusiasts are starting to gravitate towards these cars. It is not the world where the 60s cars are king anymore. And I think the 70s, 80s, and 90s were kind of a lull in the performance world for a lot of brands, and things kicked back into high gear in the 2000s with crazy cars like SRT Chryslers and Audi RS4s and V10 M5s and the Ford GT and blah, blah. You could name a ton of these cars if you really stopped and thought about it. Honda S2000, you could go for a long, long time. And I think that a lot of these cars, Chevy Corvette Z06, Nissan 350Z came back, the Z came back. All this era is hot, and it's gonna get hotter. And I think a lot of people have been predicting the rise of the 80s and 90s cars for a long time, and some of them did rise, but never crazily. I've always said, and I still feel, that mid-2000s was the 1960s of the modern era. It was an amazing time with analog cars that made big power, and it didn't last. And that era is gonna continue to increase, and we're already seeing that. You've seen what a B7 RS4 sells for lately? That era is strong. And finally, one last interesting trend I'm going to forecast for next year. Really nice examples of cars that aren't in production anymore, but aren't analog sports cars, are going to increase. We recently sold a Lexus LS430 Ultra Luxury for over $30,000. And that's big money for a 17-year-old used car. But a brand new Lexus LS is a high-tech wonderment that a lot of people don't want. Some people just want that cushy ride of the old one without having to put up with all the stuff of a newer model. We also recently sold this Mercedes-Benz 300 TD wagon for over $25,000. I actually have a lot of these I could name where we've sold really clean examples of not enthusiast cars, but just clean examples of cars from another era for a lot of money. It's been surprising to see some of these cars sell, but I think it isn't just sports car enthusiasts who long for another era. It's diesel wagon enthusiasts with this Mercedes, or it's luxury car enthusiasts with the LS430. And I think that you're gonna see more and more of these different era cars start to increase in value, even if they don't have a manual transmission and a naturally aspirated V8. And that's a very interesting trend. But there you go. Those are my trend predictions for 2022. I have no idea what's actually going to happen. I never could have predicted some of the stuff that happened over the last 2 years, but that's what I think is coming next year or later this year, depending on when this video goes up. Thank you for watching, and thank you for checking out Cars and Bids.